So this is an introduction to part 3, language and the critique of rationality. Now we turn to the last section of the course. So language, the role of language in the critique of rationality. Now, by and large, what we're doing is we are returning to the priorities of the first part of the course, and to the way of thinking about rationality, resisting universals, being fairly aggressive in saying that what passes for rationality hides interests and violence and forms of manipulation and power, the exercise of power. So we're sort of back to mainstream theory. And now what we do is now that I think we should be pretty comfortable with what's going on in contemporary theory and what's at stake. So now what we do is we fill in the picture by talking about the role of language, because technically literary theory develops out of what is sometimes called the linguistic turn. It develops out of a particular concern with language that grows in philosophy and in the burgeoning field of linguistics in the early 20th century. So what we have to do is acquaint ourselves with this more specific development in attitudes towards language, and we have to learn some of the technical vocabulary that goes along with this. So that's really the focus of these last few weeks. And once you have this part in place as well, I think you'll have a great three-pronged approach to literary theory in general. So one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to examine Nietzsche's philosophical dissatisfaction with prevailing attitudes towards language. We'll do just a very short reading from him, but we'll see how he is dissatisfied with what language does, or what it is that most people think that language does. And this philosophical reading will help us further to understand the deep-seated nature of the problems. If you go back to the end of section 1, when we were talking about how, look, people think that they can overcome their unconscious bias. They don't get how pervasive the issues are. If you understand Freud properly, you see that the problem is within you. It is not something that you can step outside of to get an objective view of the world. No, that's just not possible. That's not the way things are. Well, now in philosophical and linguistic terms, what Nietzsche says is it's inherent to the way that language works. And of course, we think in language, we talk in language, we are surrounded by language. Again, this is not something that you can step outside of. So the whole development of Nietzsche's critique of language is part of his critique of the Enlightenment project. It's part of his critique of science and the notion that science allows us to step outside of things and have an objective view of the real. This is just deeply, deeply problematic. So if we are in language, if we are bathed in language, if we are surrounded by language, and this has implications for how we need to think about critical reasoning, or how we think about what reasoning is at all. So really want to take that Nietzschean reading on board and let it let it dismantle some of your self-confidence. Let it undermine your sense that you're in control of the situation, or that you can gain control of the situation by looking at it in a detached and more nuanced and more educated manner. The problem is other than that. Our situation is other than that. And that's the challenge of coming to grips with Nietzsche. It's not that we fail to understand him. It's that we don't want to understand him because it has implications for our level of control, for our sense of knowing what's going on. That's not what we're doing right at this moment, but that's coming. And then we're going to look at the ideas of Ferdinand de Saussure. He's the linguist who gives us some of the basic vocabulary that really runs in literary theory. These days, now that we are into the 2020s, maybe it's becoming kind of vestigial part of the history of the development of theory. But it's still a technical vocabulary that you're going to run into and that we want to know about. Then we're going to look at Derrida's notion of deconstruction. We'll actually be focusing on his use of the term difference, but difference is part of his project of deconstruction, and I'll have things to say about that. Then what we're going to do is we're going to revisit we're going to revisit psychoanalysis in linguistic terms. And I do this as an object lesson so that you can see straight up Freudian psychoanalysis and come to, become acquainted with that or reacquainted with that because it is so popular and present in our culture. But now we're going to look at a guy named Jacques Lacan, who is a thoroughly Freudian psychoanalyst, but he overlays the language from Saussure. And so we can see there how Saussure's linguistic ideas get translated into other discourses and create this really kind of dynamic situation that is part of what literary theory is all about. And then the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at historicism and why it is that people do historical criticism the way that they do these days. In some ways, historicism, sometimes called new historicism, sometimes called cultural materialism, is the form of literary theory that really encompasses all different forms of theory. And allows one to do a whole bunch of different things, from ecological criticism to disabled criticism to critical race theory to queer theory to a lot of forms of feminism. A lot of things are going on. So we're gonna close out the course by looking at just one example of that. All right, so that's what's coming. So the other thing that you're doing right now in this the last few days of this week is I want you to go back to the 17th century. I want to show you a writing that at that time is part of the development of the scientific revolution, the confidence that is being put in science, and the way that science is displacing rhetoric and the humanities. So rhetoric is distrusted, language is distrusted, and what the scientific community wants to do is they want to pin things down and they want to try to stabilize language and make language more like math. And we'll discuss that. You'll have a little bit of a look at that.